welcome class. Today we're going to talk about a little bit with colors and how to add color to your shapes and documents. This is another beginner lesson for Adobe Illustrator, and we're just going to focus mainly on colors. So I'm just going to draw a couple shapes out on my screen to get us started. So I'm going to go to the Shape Tool and Toolbox, and I'm just going to, draw a rectangle and just an ellipse or something like that. And maybe you'll throw a star out there just for fun. And we have a bunch of things. So remember, you hold Shift key to keep things perfectly constrained. And there we go. Okay, so there's a couple shapes on my screen. The default colors in Illustrator are white and black. And in the toolbox toward the bottom, you can see that this is shows you what your colors you are using. This is the fill, and this is the stroke. Okay. The stroke is the outside edge. The fill is whatever's on the inside. It's hard to tell on the paper what you got, but if you move this off the side of the screen, you can see that this is actually white. So if we want to change the colors of things, there's a number of ways to do it. If we stay with what's going on in the toolbox right here, if you double click directly on the fill in the toolbox, it'll open up a window. And this is a color picker window. And if you are used to using Photoshop, this should be a very familiar window to you. There's a slider here along this rainbow. You can pick whatever hue you want. And then out in the window here, you can pick basically a saturation. A desaturated color will be mostly black and white, and a highly saturated color will be full of the hue. So now we're just going to pick kind of like a slate blue or something like that for this shape. Not very exciting, but there we go. You also notice there's a hex code down here. If you're doing tutorials online, they very often refer to the colors as hex code, and this is where you could type that in. And you can also see the process color here for cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. So there we go, and we're going to click OK, and now that is filled with the color. And it has a black stroke on it. It's hard to see when it's selected because right now the stroke is only 1 point stroke, which is very small. So at the top of my screen, this is my control bar. And remember, if you go to Window and if you go to Control, you'll have that control bar. All right. If it's not there, go to Window, Control right now, and you should then see it, and we can increase the stroke. Okay, so that's one way to do it. You probably have a window open on the side of your screen too called the Properties window. So another place that you can find the colors and make changes is in this window here. And this is actually a pretty easy window to use as well. And it's very much echoes what's going on up here in your control window. So you can probably get by without the control window if you have the properties window open. If you do not have the properties window open, every time I talk about a window that is not on your screen, you should go to the window drop down menu, and then you can find it there. And you can see properties is checked, and now it's open on my screen. So this works the same way. If you click on the fill, it'll give you swatches. And the swatches are kind of like the smaller set of Crayola crayons compared to that color picker window. So if I need to change the color, I could change the color here. And then I could also change the color of the stroke by clicking on the picture of stroke. And if I want to make the stroke red, now I have a red stroke with a blue fill. If you're the control window is open, the same thing is up here at the top. I'm not going to need to go through this, but if you click on that, it's the same thing. Okay, so there's also a window just for color. There's also a window just for strokes. There's also a window just for gradients. Now, gradient is a completely different thing. So I'm going to select a different object here. And I'll have a tutorial just for gradients because there's a lot to it. But if you look in your toolbox at the bottom here, there's a picture of a black and white gradient. So gradient is a transition within a fill. And your gradient window allows you to control the gradient. So like I said, I'll do this in a whole separate video, but there is a lot of control with the gradient, and you can fill with different colors and whatnot. Okay, so there's gradient fills, there's a regular solid fill, and there's also some preset patterns that you could find in Illustrator too. So when I have the star selected, I go into the little swatches window, and there's some preset patterns that they put in here. They're kind of cool, but if you're doing your own artwork, I wouldn't go using the preset stuff unless you're going to modify it. And eventually, I can teach you guys how to make your own pattern. So that is all very customizable down the road. Okay. A couple other things I just want to show you is, and notice, and maybe I should have said this earlier on, I can only change the color of the objects that are selected. So if I have one object selected and I want to change the color of that object, I can, I have to have that particular object selected. It's not going to change the object that's not selected. Okay, so even if it's the only object on your screen, you have to click on it, select it. The other thing is, if you, I'm going to open up my swatches window. So there's a window also for the swatches. And the reason why this is important is that you can add swatches to it. So if I take this color and I drag it into my swatches window, I'm going to put it right between the red and the yellow there. This is the color I just made with the color picker window, and now I can save this color for later. So if you're doing artwork and you want to add a crayon to the crayon set here, then you can just drag that color once you have it made in here. This way, when I click on other objects and I make a new object or something, I can then go back in and now I can fill it with the color that I used before. Okay, so that was a little quick display of how to use colors. A couple more things before I end this lesson. If you look closely in the toolbox, there's a set of small tools down here. And when you have an object selected, if I want to switch the foreground and background color, so I'm going to go use the red one here. So let me select this red and blue shape, and I'll put this right next to it so you can see what's going on. This will swap the fill and stroke. So it's an easy way. Sometimes if you start with the default colors, so this is another button. If you start with default colors and you want a black object, you could just go to the default, which is also D on your keyboard, and then X on your keyboard is swap. So this is a D is the key command, and X is the is swap. Okay. So there we go, and that is basically colors. If you hit this button right here, this means none. That means now there is no stroke going on. Okay, so I can do no stroke, no fill, and when this object's not selected, guess what? You can't see it. So you got to be careful sometimes if you're drawing objects and they're disappearing. It's because you have no fill and no stroke on it, and you may end up having like 100 objects on your screen. That there's going to come a point in time where that happens to you because you keep drawing objects that have no fill and no stroke on. And they're like, oh, why are they disappearing? Why are they disappearing? Why are they disappearing? And then I, say, hey, why don't you just select all the stuff on your document, and you can see all these things that you drew are actually there. Okay, so that was the basic lesson for colors, how to get them into your objects, and this way you can add a little bit of life to some of your drawings so that everything's not in black and white.